The world that we're actually living in right now is one that is going to require lifelong learning. We are purpose-built to help kind of education technology founders create and scale the world's biggest and best education technology companies. Like education, it's the second largest industry in the world. Like it's second just to healthcare. In 2010, and you start to say, well, how many schools in the US K-12 market had access to high-speed broadband internet? And it's less than 10% of K-12 schools that actually had access to high-speed broadband internet. You kind of fast forward over the next decade, now close to 100% of US K-12 schools actually have access to high-speed broadband internet. There's this concept of personalized learning that has been discussed like for quite some time. And AI and this especially ability for generative AI, it's now finally possible to be able to take kind of significant amounts of information in and then analyze that and then in real time create, like for Prashant, what does your personalized learning journey look like versus what does potentially my personalized learning journey look like?
Hey everyone, this is Prashant and I'll be host of the VC 10X podcast, and today we have Amit Patel with us. Amit is one of the managing directors at Owl Ventures, one of the largest Edtech venture capital firms with over $2 billion in assets under management. Amit has served on the board of directors and led investments in many of the world's leading education technology companies. In this episode, we talk about how they look at Edtech landscape at Owl Ventures. How do they identify promising edtech startups? What does the future of education look like? Exciting trends they are closely tracking. Role of AI in personalized learning. How did they manage to scale Owl Ventures to over $2 billion in assets under management in just over a decade of existence? And lots more. So without wasting any time, let's dive straight in. This episode is sponsored by my own podcasting agency called Podcast 10X, where I help venture capitalists, asset managers, allocators, and family offices in starting their own podcast and building a strong brand. Podcast 10X is designed in a way to work well with the busy schedule of investors, where we handle every aspect of podcast production so you can focus on investing. If you're looking to build a strong investor brand, starting a podcast should be right up your priority list. It's the only form of marketing where you can showcase your strong network, in other words, access to limited partners and founders, and grow that network further. And contrary to what most people hear, it's still very early to start a podcast. There are at least 10x more newsletters and 1000x more blogs than there are podcasts in this world. You can learn more about our podcasting services at podcast10x.com. I'll make sure to add the link in the description below. Enjoy this episode. Hey Amit, so good to have you on the VC 10X podcast. How are you doing?
Great. Thanks for having me today, Prashant. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a pleasure having you on, and I'm very excited for this conversation about all things EdTech. But before we start on that, can we first have your personal story and how you got into investing?
Yeah. So I've had a long history in the education sector. In fact, my entire career has been in the education sector. So I've been with Owl since we were started, which was a little bit more than 10 years ago. And then prior to, being with Owl, I was actually at Success Academy Charter Schools in New York. It's a charter school network that I believe now has something around like 40 schools in New York. So I was helping with their kind of education technology efforts at Success Academies. Had the chance to buy, build, deploy education technology solutions over there and design things such as their lottery admission system, as well as deploy solutions like Dreambox, which actually is a company that we eventually ended up investing in out of Owl. And then prior to Success Academies, I was actually at Mathnasium. They do after-school math learning centers for kids, similar to Kumon and Sylvan. Again, I believe they're about at 1,000 locations in the US and 30 different countries. And I helped start their quality assurance program as well as some of their sales training over there as well too. And then prior to that, I ran my own tutoring company. So again, I've been in the education space my entire career.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. And talking about the education space, and everyone has their own experience with education. Like they have to go through education, and so did I. And I was very frustrated with how the education system is. at least where I'm in India, right? I think the things they were teaching me in school were kind of redundant. Their ways of teaching were not great. The books were kind of outdated. I was studying business, by the way, and the things they were teaching were like business principles written 30, 40 years back, which might be still applicable to today, but there is so much more to it, right? There are modern businesses being built in modern fields like AI and so on, which were subjects completely absent from the curriculum. And I really felt that education is really broken, right? And I would love to get your views on that, being one of the largest edtech investors in the world. How do you look at education? Where do you think it is broken, and what needs to happen to get it fixed?
Yeah, I think at a high level, the education system, the way that kind of it's been currently designed, and a lot of people have talked about this, was kind of designed in this industrial age where there was this desire to say, hey, there's a lot of benefit if we do create an education system that actually does help a lot more, especially participants from society, move from that kind of agrarian or farmer related like kind of industry to the industrial society, and kind of that's how you have the framework of kind of how the education system itself was set up. I think where we're sitting today, and one of the things that is causing like kind of some of these changes that are actually happening in the education system to happen is, one, we have a much more global economy that we actually live in right now. And the world is more connected than it's ever been. I think second, there's obviously a huge digital economy that we actually have right now as well too. And so the pace of innovation that's actually happening is continuing to increase like year over year or decade over decade. And then I think third thing that's actually happening is, this idea that like people are just working for longer, right? It's not just about having a 20, 30-year career, but people are thinking about having a 40 or maybe even 50-year career. And so as you think about, the pace of innovation that actually happens, and how do you yourself as an individual kind of continue to stay competitive, continue to like kind of have the adequate skills to kind of have a career that lasts that long. Fundamentally, what we've moved away from is this idea that, you are going to be done with education, at 18, maybe if you're graduating from high school, or 22, maybe if you're graduating from college, or maybe somewhere in your late 20s or 30s if you're going to grad school. And instead, like the world that we're actually living in right now is one that is going to require lifelong learning, right? And this idea of, there's not just like a minimum set of facts that you can kind of memorize and then that's enough, right? First of all, there's way too many things to like kind of start to know and learn. I think second of all, there's a lot of specializations that can kind of go into and really deep areas and things like that. And then third, you take something like AI, right? Like that frankly wasn't something that the world was really talking about several years back, and now it's something that folks are saying, well, this is going to have a huge impact on kind of how each of us live, how work is done, and everything like that. And so these types of changes that end up happening, I think, are something that is having a deep impact on how we're thinking about education as a world and as a society.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And Owl Ventures has established itself as one of the largest edtech VC firms out there, I think with over 2 billion in assets under management. Tell us about some of that journey. How did that journey start? And because there are a lot of edtech firms out there, but none so big, right? So what was the reason behind that success, and how's that journey been like at Owl Ventures?
Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, it's been a little bit more than 10 years since Owl was started. And I think the journey has been absolutely phenomenal, and really consider myself lucky to be a part of the journey and work with my colleagues as well as the founders that we get to work with. And I think the thing that really inspired like kind of the founding of Owl, and why the timing of Owl getting started made a lot of sense, is there was a lot of investment that was happening in kind of the infrastructure that was actually necessary for education technology companies to get created and started. And so I think there was different efforts around various parts of the world, but let's just take, for example, the US K-12 sector as an example. you go back to the first decade of this century and, in 2010, and you start to say, well, how many schools in the US K-12 market had access to high-speed broadband internet? And it's less than 10% of K-12 schools that actually had access to high-speed broadband internet. And things like, kind of the Chromebook or iPads and things like that, that wasn't something that schools necessarily had access to. And you kind of fast forward over the next decade, and basically, now close to 100% of US K-12 schools actually have access to high-speed broadband internet. This idea of like student to device ratio, meaning one device per student, it's not as ubiquitous as high-speed broadband internet is, but it is in a much better spot than it was certainly in 2010. And so you now actually have kind of that infrastructure that was being invested in and created to actually allow education technology companies to be created. I think similarly in other parts of the world, you had policies that were getting put into place to allow, again, funding to be put in for infrastructure. I think you had an acknowledgement that whether it was online courses or universities and things like that, you were having policies put into place to like kind of support that. And then overall, I think just like connectivity as well as like mobile connectivity has massively increased. And so these types of like macro shifts that were happening really allowed for there to be significant tailwinds for entrepreneurs to create education technology companies in a way fundamentally that wasn't possible even in the first decade of this century. And I think, again, over time, what we've seen at OWL is this ability for these founders to now, create and scale these companies faster than it was ever possible before.
Absolutely. And what would you attribute the success of the firm to? What made it possible to scale to over $2 billion in AUM? What's the secret behind that success, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think in terms of like what we like to focus on at OWL, I think is we go by this belief that we are, purpose built to help kind of education technology founders create and scale the world's, biggest and best education technology company. So I think everything that we've like kind of created from the ground up is really focused on kind of thinking about that. And so, every single person that works at our firm has a deep history and understanding of education and technology. I think that the LPs that kind of are involved in our fund as well. A lot of them deeply care about the education sector. I think also we have a great network of advisors and experts that we have relationships with. Similarly, we have kind of a network and relationship with customers and potential partners for our portfolio companies. And so all of that kind of coming together, I think, is one of the biggest reasons why we have been able to kind of continue to create a really phenomenal portfolio of companies at our firm and kind of continued to allow us to scale in the way that we have over the last decade or so.
Absolutely, that's commendable. And talking about how you look at the edtech sector as a whole, and how you categorize it into different segments, subsegments within edtech. So, can you give us a view into that?
Yeah, so the way that we think about the education technology sector is, kind of a few different sectors. So there's like kind of what I would describe as like the formal learning sector. So that's early learning, I think K-12, higher education, and then kind of the more informal learning. So then that starts to go into things like adult learning or lifelong learning or corporate learning. And then we also have another category that we call, which is the EdTech Plus sector. So that's EdTech plus other major sectors like FinTech or Health Tech. So an example of that is a company in our portfolio called Hazel Health, which is bringing telemedicine services to the K-12 sector. So that's at the intersection of EdTech and Health Tech. And so those are like kind of broadly the different categories that we look at across the education technology sector. I think within that, you can also have nuances of, oh, is this a direct-to-consumer company? Is this one that's actually selling to schools or governments? Is this one that might be doing a B2B2C type of motion as well, or some type of combination? And then I think also on top of that, you have kind of companies that are, focused on their domestic market, as well as others that are starting to think about more of a global audience as well, which is really important, and I think like specific to the education technology sector to take into consideration, because you want to kind of understand, especially if you are working with schools and governments and things like that, what are the policies and rules and regulations that are in place that kind of support that type of company to be successful within that local geography.
Absolutely. And talking about geographies, I would believe that different geographies would have different stage of development in terms of where education is and how technologically advanced it has become or is starting to become, right? So can you give us an insight into that, that what regions are kind of leading in that race, and which regions are picking up and which regions need more work and there is more scope for improvement in those regions? If you can give us a look into that.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think the really exciting thing about education technology sector and what makes this so, I think, inspiring of a sector to work in is this desire for high quality education isn't something that's unique to a certain part of the world, right? It's not like, oh, this is only like something that's happening in India, or this is only something that's happening in the US. Like this desire for individuals, families, for their kids or adults even to say, hey, I would like to access the best education to set myself up for success in whatever my life goals are, universal need. And so what we have been seeing actually is that great ideas are actually happening globally. And so as a firm, we invest around the world. We have companies in obviously the US market. We have companies in Latin America, in Europe, in Africa, in various parts of Asia, including India as well too. And so this desire that innovation is going to happen, and this talent that is coming into the sector, we have seen kind of great entrepreneurs come from all parts of the world. I think again, what makes it particularly exciting is the fact that entrepreneurs from different geographies also understand how to like kind of serve that market in a very unique way. And that's what's allowing kind of this innovation to actually happen. And then the other thing I'd say is like the innovation is also happening because of like significant demographic trends that are actually happening in the world. And so I'll give you one example of that is you take the continent of Africa, right? And you start to look at, okay, well, where is the world's largest student population actually going to be over the next, call it 20 or 30 years? And that's actually on the continent of Africa, is where the world's largest student population is going to be. And then you start to say, well, what does the university infrastructure there look like? And kind of if you start to say, do we even have like enough physical universities to serve the student population? And there's a mismatch there. And so I think what you've started to see, and we have a company in our portfolio called ULesson, which the CEO of that company is Sim Shigaya. And he, in partnership with some of the governments in Africa, have started to recognize like, hey, this is an upcoming problem that needs to get solved, is how are we actually going to give enough high quality higher education solutions to all the students that are going to actually expect this. They've actually started one of the continent's first open online universities called Miva University. And I think that is an example of kind of the innovation that is actually happening because of the needs of kind of that local geography and local continent, and because of some of these demographic shifts that are actually happening. And that's why we're excited to work with somebody like Sim and the ULesson team to kind of support these types of innovations that are actually happening.
Yeah, that's an interesting insight, that innovation is also somewhat catered to and different based on the region it is operating in. And talking about the evolution of EdTech ever since Owl Ventures was started, how have you seen it change and evolve over time?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that I would say is the acceleration that we have seen kind of in the education technology sector, frankly, has been faster than any of us like anticipated when we were originally starting out. And I think that's on several factors. So first, I would say is kind of the talent that is coming into the space. I think every year, as we meet with kind of founders that are starting these companies, we are just blown away by the talent that is kind of coming into the sector. I think that's again for a lot of reasons, which is that founders I think nowadays are really asking themselves like, I want to do something that really matters. Like, I want to do something that is going to have a real impact on the world. And to our earlier discussion, I think this desire, like, to find high quality education solutions is something that is universally felt. And so I think we are seeing kind of some of the best minds around the world saying, hey, this is a problem or an area that I really want to focus on. And we are seeing kind of amazing talent actually happen. I think second of all, that investment that I was talking about, kind of in that infrastructure, again, as it's happening more globally, as we are starting to see kind of this digital and connected economy, as we are starting to see people start to think about not just what's my immediate career after graduating, but what's my second or third or fourth or fifth job, or maybe I want to change careers, and these types of phenomenons are actually starting to happen. I think that's where there's another tremendous opportunity. Right here in the US right now, the majority of higher education students are actually non-traditional students. And what I mean by that is they're, people with families. They're people that have kids. They're people that have jobs. And so again, how do you cater to that audience? How do you meet the needs of what those individuals are actually looking to do? And so I think these types of, fundamental shifts that are happening in society has made it a really exciting time for entrepreneurs to enter the space, for the technology to be there. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of excitement when it comes to AI and the impact that it's having on education. You've seen a lot of the even large language models, like the main players, come out with education-specific versions of their LLMs. And then you've also heard a lot of them talk about the fact that one of the sectors that there could be a potentially significant impact is on the education sector. And I think that's because the potential that this technology has to really deliver on some of the promises that, kind of people have been most excited about when it comes to education technology is finally, like, kind of possible. And an example of that I would give is, like, there's this concept of personalized learning that has been discussed, like, for quite some time. And this idea that, hey, we have known in research that if you can really deliver to a student, like, kind of the learning content that they need at the time that they need it, keep them in their, like, kind of proximal zone of development, that's the best way to kind of help them, be challenged and then kind of continue to learn and succeed. And AI, and this especially ability for generative AI, it's now finally possible to be able to take kind of significant amounts of information in and then analyze that, and then in real time create, like, for Prashant, like, what does your personalized learning journey look like versus what does potentially my personalized learning journey look like. I think prior to this type of technology actually existing, what was happening was, hey, maybe we had, defined, 2,000 or 3,000 different journeys. And then it's like, okay, well, Prashant, based on your responses, this is the closest one. And so therefore I'm putting you on this journey, but it might not be, again, that exact journey that you needed, and really catering to your personalized needs.
Absolutely, yeah, that's quite interesting. And I was going to ask you about that personalized learning aspect, which AI has sort of enabled. I'm glad you covered that. Being a very reputable firm, you must have a superior access to quality deal flow. In that, how do you select and pick the companies that you want to back?
Yeah. Again, I mean, I think I will just start by saying, I think we are really excited and honored about the founders that we are working with, and I think they have incredible visions in terms of how they're thinking about impacting the world. What I would say in terms of, as we are kind of looking at a variety of deals or opportunities to partner with founders, there's three main categories that we look at whenever we are evaluating a specific deal. The the first is, what I would describe as metrics or business fundamentals. And so that means, you know, what has kind of the historical growth of the company look like? What do unit economics look like? What do the projections of this business look like? I think we also start to dig into things like, what is the long-term competitive advantage here? Why is this a company that has the right to win? And, start to really build a thesis around, okay, what is it about this company in either historical or go forward projections that make it really compelling? So that's what I would describe as, like, kind of bucket one. I think bucket two that we look at is the team. We are, investing in the idea as much as we are in the people. And we want to kind of understand what it is that inspired this individual to actually start this company. What insight is it that they do have? What is their kind of definition of success look like when it comes to the ultimate outcome that they're trying to drive for? And we recognize that this is going to be, in most cases, a very long-term partnership. And so, we want them to be excited to be working with us. We want to be excited to be working with them. And so the team and the people aspect is something that we also take quite seriously and spend some time evaluating. And then the third impact is related to outcomes and efficacy. For us, we believe that, the companies that are going to be the longest lasting, the most valuable, the most scaled are the ones that over time are going to be able to have a direct impact on whether it's student outcomes, learner outcomes, or educators. And so, we are pre-investment kind of thinking about how are these companies, measuring that or proving that. And then post-investment, we are also working very closely with these companies to improve the rigor with which they actually think about outcomes measurement and moving them from, especially with early stage companies, which tend to be much more qualitative in nature, to as they become more mature companies, starting to become much more quantitative in nature.
Absolutely, that's quite insightful. And EdTech as a sector has seen some massive successes as well as some massive failures. Uh, what do new EdTech founders just starting out need to keep in mind? That these are the key things that I need to get right, and these are the mistakes that I should avoid. So basically, a two-edged question for you. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think there's a few, maybe a few things that I would highlight there. So uh, the first is like really understanding it. Like, let's use an example, like really understanding how it is that your customer is currently doing things, right? And so let's start with an example of, again, coming back to if you're creating a company in the K-12 sector, it is, kind of coming in and understanding how do budgets work? Like what are schools kind of currently spending their money on? And then second, it's like, well, how is a teacher spending his or her time in the classroom? Like, what are the expectations that, like, are actually demanded from that educator? And, kind of as the founder is thinking about like kind of introducing a new product, starting to say, okay, well, I do understand like kind of where in the budget this product is going to get paid for. I also understand like how I could easily fit within like kind of the workflow or the expectations that are actually being put on this educator. Uh, and basically what I would say is like ensuring that there's not a significant disconnect in terms of, creating something that you believe is like a phenomenal product, but then ultimately struggles because it has like requires, so much more time from the educator or doesn't take into consideration how school budgets work. And then so like as procurement departments are thinking about, well, how am I going to pay for this? Like that it kind of creates friction in that entire process, if that makes sense. So that's bucket like kind of one that I would say is like really something to spend some time thinking about. I think bucket number two, I would say, is really thinking about, where is there incremental improvement versus exponential improvement. And this is where I think, in all startups, like there's always like limited time, limited resources, and really where are we kind of focused on in terms of, differentiating ourselves from the market or creating kind of a 10x better solution than where the competitors might be, or whatever else is available in the market. And I think that's a second place where starting to really understand, okay, if I invest in this specific thing, that is really going to make a significant difference for my company versus, oh, I could do these things which are going to make some incremental improvement, but ultimately that is not going to leave the company in a very different place than where I'm at today. And what I would say is like the best founders over time I've observed are very good at kind of differentiating what is incremental versus what is exponential, and really focusing time on effort on the things that are exponential. And so that's the second thing that I would say. And then the third piece I would say is like data fidelity, right? And what I mean by that is, I think, the nature of startups is like, obviously making decisions without having like kind of perfect information or perfect insights. I think if you were waiting to like kind of have 100% insight on something, it'd be very difficult to like actually create a company and a startup. But I think if you are saying like, hey, I have looked at some data, or I am making a decision based on these samples or whatever the case might be, or these trend lines, like really understanding, like, is that the right data to actually be looking at? Because a lot of times when things have not gone according to plan, you start to like kind of peel back the onion and say, okay, well, why didn't this work out the way that we wanted to? Well, this is what we had thought. Like, okay, well, where did that assumption come from? And what was that evidence based on? And then it's like, well, we talked to this number of parents, or we talked to this number of school. Yeah, but then, did you ask this question, or did you ask that question, or did you ask like a deeper, kind of follow up? And it's like, oh, actually, we didn't. And so we got, we thought we had confirmation that they were going to adopt our product. But if we would have asked these like 3 or 4 additional questions, like it turns out like they probably weren't actually going to adopt our product. And so I think, again, that's just using that as an example of saying, like, making sure whatever data you are relying on, like to actually make decision, is something that, you have high quality and a lot of reliability on as well.
Absolutely, a lot of good insights there, and I think a lot of edtech founders are going to benefit from that. And talking about the current state of edtech, there are like newspaper headlines saying, "Oh, okay, is edtech dead?" Right? Edtech is, as you'd probably agree, going through somewhat of a downturn from what it was maybe 5 6 years back, right? Maybe when it was at its peak. How do you look at that? Do you think things have slowed down, or maybe things have not turned out the way they should have? How do you look at the tech space currently?
Yeah. I think, look, this is probably not going to be surprising to hear from me, but I am extremely bullish on kind of the future of education technology. And, I think it fundamentally comes down to a lot of those trends that we talked about before, like this desire for individuals or families or parents to, again, get the best education that they possibly can, to set their own lives up for success, to achieve their own life dreams. Like, this is not a need that is going away, right? This is not something that, you know, 5 years ago was true and is no longer true right now. So I think fundamentally, like education, it's the second largest industry in the world. Like it's second just to healthcare. So it's like, you know, people are like, am I alive? And then the second question is like, am I going to be able to achieve what I want to achieve when I'm alive? And what do you need to do that? You need an education, right? And so I think from that perspective, I think that this sector, we are what I would describe as like the very beginning stages. Like, I mean, earlier we talked about in this conversation, like how, in 2010, like less than 10% of schools had access to high speed broadband internet. So like it was impossible for you to create like an education technology company at that point. It only actually became possible for you to really do that in the last decade or so. And so I think the kind of, ups and downs or whatever the case might be that we have seen in the education sector are very, first of all, normal for any sector. And then I'd say second, the demand and the need for kind of innovation in this sector, that expectation is just increasing every single year. And so I think that's point number one that I would make. I think the second point that I would make comes back to, kind of some of those demographic shifts that I was talking about, right? Like, even if we wanted to like kind of not innovate, like we're going to be forced to innovate, right? Like I think it's, again, some of those examples that I gave about what's happening on the continent of Africa. I think it's this desire that like folks are working longer for 30, 40, 50 years. You're having innovation of things like AI that are coming out. And so you are going to have to rely on education technology companies to kind of reskill and upskill folks. especially as, kind of careers are created and different careers might be sunset. And so I think that is something that's going to force kind of that innovation to happen. And then I think the third piece I would say is the talent, right? Like I think again, every year we see just more talented founders kind of continue to come into the sector. The companies that they are creating are becoming more innovative year over year. They're scaling even faster, and they're reaching more students and learners on their platforms. And so, I think that again gives me a lot of faith, gives me a lot of like excitement as we think about like kind of the future of this category. And so I think like again, we're just at the beginning stages of this, and it's going to be a long and exciting kind of path ahead for the sector.
Absolutely, quite interesting. Being an investor, what are the most exciting opportunity areas for you that you have identified that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, so I think there is a lot of excitement at the intersection of AI and education technology. So that is definitely one area where we have continued to make a lot of new investments, as well as kind of continuing to put a lot of our energy and time towards to kind of continue to understand what is actually going to be possible at that intersection of education and AI. I think that I gave the example earlier in terms of, the personalized learning example of why that potentially could be exciting. I think there's a whole host of other things that kind of could be potentially exciting. I think like, analyzing data or starting to give students like feedback almost in real time, or, starting to do things that right now take a long time for educators to actually get done and doesn't allow them to like focus on that one-on-one interaction or small group interaction. I think is really going to be game changing in terms of what the impact is that AI can have on the education technology sector. So that's, I'd say, like kind of bucket one of areas that we are spending time in. I think bucket two is related to upskilling and reskilling. Again, coming back to this kind of trend that we've talked about, which is this idea of, hey, how do I continue to be competitive in this global economy? So there's a lot of companies around the world that are starting to think about, either through AR and VR or other technology, starting to think about how do I introduce individuals to new skills, as well as like kind of introduce them to new careers and things like that. And so that's what I would describe as like kind of a second bucket where there's a lot of excitement, and we're spending quite a bit of time. And then I think the third bucket that I would say is kind of the global economy piece. And so again, there's companies are starting to think about how can they serve like customers across the world. Students, I think, are saying, hey, I don't want to be just limited to like the education that I can access within a certain mile radius of me, right? Like I want to learn from the best of the best in whatever field and whatever specialization I'm interested in. And so, companies, I think, that are making it possible for corporations to access the best talent around the world, for students to learn from whoever they want to around the world, and making that, what I would say is like internationalization possible is a third area where we see a lot of excitement.
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks for sharing that. And let's talk about portfolio construction. It's a big fund with a big AUM. How does that impact how you manage the portfolio, and what are the compositions, and how you manage risk, and on that?
Yeah. So given the fact that we are vertically focused, meaning just exclusively focused on the education technology sector, we have made the decision that, kind of first of all, as I mentioned, we are investing globally. So we have companies all over the world that we have invested in. And then the second thing is we have also stage agnostic. So meaning we are doing early stage as well as growth stage. And so our fundamental like kind of mandate or belief is, kind of starting to work with and investing in the world's best education technology companies. And so that's what our kind of mission and mandate is, and we've given ourselves the flexibility to kind of go after that.
Right. So there are no targets whatsoever that, from, like, let's say the earliest stage, the pre-seed, seed, we should have not more than this percentage of the fund allocated to that, and then somewhat mature companies, Series A, Series B, we should have at least this much percentage allocated to. No such criteria is set there, you're saying.
Yeah, so I think again, our philosophy has been, again, that's something that we're like kind of continuously looking at, continuously talking about as a team. And, to your point, like what does the portfolio construction look like and kind of where have we been kind of focused on? And so that is certainly something that we look at and kind of have a dialogue on and kind of make sure that we're feeling good about the portfolio that has been constructed. What I would say is that's not something that we are kind of coming in with like a hard fixed mandate around before kind of starting to invest the fund. And I think that comes from the fact that we really want to be responsive to actually what is happening in the market, and kind of where are we seeing the most exciting opportunities and being able to take advantage of kind of those opportunities. And so for us, it's a lot more important, I would say, to give ourselves that flexibility as opposed to kind of saying, hey, well, we had this thought, 3 or 4 years ago. The world is a very different place today than it was 3 or 4 years ago. But we've locked ourselves into these like artificial kind of allocation buckets, and now we're going to just continue to allocate that way, even if it's not the best way to actually be doing that.
Got it. Got it. Yeah. And coming to my last question before we do the rapid fire round, and this is what's been your biggest learning investing in tech companies over the years?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, the biggest learning for me has actually been like it's the people that matter. And what I think what I mean by that when I say like it's the people that matter is I think having like the right either leadership team at the company or the network of advisors that potentially have seen like kind of the path that you've been on before and are able to offer insights like that can be game changing for a company. And so I think what I would say is like just don't underestimate like kind of the value in that because it can save a lot of cycles. It can save a lot of like, capital not being spent in the right way. And I think it can lead to a lot of innovation and ideas that, can put the company on a fundamentally like different trajectory. And, I think that's something that as each year goes by, like I've just kind of continued to appreciate more and more. And I would say like that is something that I've seen again, time and time again, really, really make a big difference.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And now, doing the rapid fire round, wherein I'll ask you six quick questions about the investing you're doing
Okay.
at All Ventures, and you have to give six quick answers, right? So the first one is, what are the sectors and regions you invest in?
Yeah. So as mentioned, it's education technology only. We think about that as early learning, K-12, higher education, adult learning, corporate learning, lifelong learning, as well as the EdTech Plus category. And we are investing globally.
Awesome. What's the typical stage you invest in?
We're flexible on that also as discussed. So we're doing early stage as well as growth stage.
Great. Do you lead rounds?
Yes, we typically lead and co-lead rounds.
Awesome. Where can founders get in touch?
Yeah. So email is great. Amit@vc.com is one way to kind of get in touch, as well as LinkedIn or encourage you to check out our website. We actually have our education outcomes report that talks about how our companies are thinking about measuring outcome, and I encourage you to check that out as well as some of the news and articles that we put out over there as well.
Awesome. Last one. Where can our listeners follow you?
So LinkedIn, I'd say, is probably the best place. I try to kind of post from time to time.
Great. I'll make sure to put all those links in show notes. I think I missed one, which is, what's the typical check size you put in?
Yeah, again, flexible on that, given the fact that we're doing early to growth stage. So
Okay.
so a range of ability there.
Great. Awesome. I'll put the links that you mentioned just now in the show notes so that listeners can get there easily. Thanks so much for doing this with us, Amit. And I've wanted to have you on for so long and glad to have you here. And thanks for sharing all your insights. I wish you happy investing.
Yeah, no, thank you, Prashant. Really enjoyed the discussion, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, a pleasure.